The stars had always been kind to humanity. For 300 years, they had spread across the galaxy, building colonies, making friends with alien species, and dreaming of a future filled with peace. They believed that kindness would be returned with kindness. They were wrong. The colony of New Eden was one of humanity's proudest achievements. 4 million people lived there, in cities built between mountains and seas. Children went to schools where they learned about Earth's history. Families gathered for dinners and celebrated birthdays. Young couples fell in love under alien moons. It was a place of hope, a place that showed what humanity could build when given the chance. The Empire had watched humanity's growth with growing irritation. They were an ancient species, rulers of 40 star systems, and they did not like sharing the galaxy with newcomers. To them, humans were insects, pests that needed to be controlled. When the High Council decided that humanity needed a lesson, they chose New Eden as their target. Commander Danny Mercer was leading a routine patrol when the distress call came through. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray at his temples, a veteran of 20 years in the United Earth Navy. He had seen battles before, but nothing could have prepared him for what he heard through the speakers of his ship, the USS Valiant. Screams, explosions, a woman crying for her children, and then silence. Danny pushed his engines beyond their limits, but space was vast and cruel. When the Valiant finally arrived at New Eden, the planet was burning. They had used orbital bombardment, raining fire from the sky onto schools and hospitals and homes. There were no military targets on New Eden. There were only families. Lieutenant Kate stood beside Danny on the bridge, her face pale as she stared at the. She was young, barely 30, with short brown hair and a voice that usually carried confidence. Now, that voice shook as she played back the final transmissions from the surface. A mother singing a lullaby to her daughter as the bombs fell. A teacher telling her students to stay calm, that help was coming. A boy calling for his father, his voice cutting off mid-sentence. Danny felt something break inside him, not his heart that had already shattered. Something deeper, something that had always believed in mercy and second chances. He looked at the burning world and felt it turn to cold iron in his chest. They had left survivors. Not many, just a few hundred who had been in underground shelters. They had been left alive on purpose, to tell the story, to spread the fear. They wanted humanity to know what happened to species that did not obey. 1 hour after the Valiant arrived, a message came from the ambassador. His face appeared on every screen in the fleet, a creature with gray skin and 4 eyes that held no warmth. "Let this serve as a reminder," the ambassador said, his voice smooth and cold. "Humanity will remain in its designated systems. You will not expand. You will not grow. You will stay where you are told. This is the natural order. You are prey animals. You will act accordingly. If you do not, more examples will follow." The transmission ended. Danny stood in silence, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. Around him, his crew waited, looking to him for guidance, for hope, for something that would make sense of the horror they had witnessed. Back on Earth, Admiral Victor Hayes watched the same message in his office at command headquarters. He was an old man, 73 years old, with white hair and a face lined by decades of difficult decisions. He had fought in 3 wars and had always chosen the path of peace when possible. He believed in diplomacy, in talking instead of fighting, in finding common ground with even the most hostile species. But as he watched the ambassador call humanity prey, something shifted in Victor's eyes. The warmth faded, replaced by something cold and ancient, something that remembered when humanity had been hunters in the wilderness, when survival had meant becoming the thing that other creatures feared. He called a meeting of the Joint Chiefs within the hour. They gathered in a secure room deep beneath the surface, away from satellites and spies. Victor stood before them, his voice steady. 300 years ago, when we first ventured into space, we made a choice. We chose to be peaceful. We chose to hide our weapons, to bury our worst technologies, to show the galaxy only our kindest face. We did this because we hoped that kindness would be returned. He paused, looking at each face around the table. We were wrong. They have taught us that some species see kindness as weakness. They have killed 4 million of our people to prove a point. They expect us to bow our heads and accept our place as prey. Admiral Hayes walked to a secure terminal and entered a code that had not been used in over a century. Screens flickered to life, showing files marked with the highest classification levels, projects that had been locked away and forgotten. Project Prometheus, he said quietly. Weapons we developed and swore never to use. Technologies so terrible that we hid them even from ourselves. We built them because we knew that someday something might come for us. Something that would not listen to reason, would not accept peace, would not stop until we were gone. He turned to face his commanders, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They think they know what humans are. They have seen our cities, our art, our children playing in parks. They think that is all we are. They have never read our history books. They do not know about our wars, our weapons, the things we did to each other before we learned to be better. He pressed a button, and the Prometheus files began to unlock. They wanted to teach us fear. Instead, they have woken something that should have been left sleeping. They called us prey animals. They will learn that we are nothing of the sort. In the weeks that followed, humanity mourned. Services were held on every planet, every station, every ship. 4 million names were read aloud, one by one, so that none would be forgotten. Candles burned in windows across 100 worlds. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. A cold determination that did not burn like rage, but settled into bones like ice. Factories that had built farming equipment began building weapons. Scientists who had studied medicine began studying destruction. Soldiers who had trained for defense began training for attack. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had hurt humanity's children and laughed about it. They had poked a sleeping giant and expected it to whimper. Instead, the giant was opening its eyes, and it was very, very angry. 3 months passed, and the galaxy relaxed. The Empire congratulated itself on a lesson well taught. Trade routes reopened. Alien diplomats stopped looking over their shoulders when humans walked by. Everyone assumed that humanity had learned its place. They could not have been more wrong. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, a secret facility hummed with activity. 2,000 scientists worked in shifts that never ended, sleeping in small rooms and eating meals at their desks. At the center of it all stood Dr. Cole, a woman of 55 with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had not known rest in weeks. Had spent her career developing weapons that she prayed would never be built. Theoretical designs for things so terrible that she had locked them away in her own mind, refusing to put them on paper. Now, those designs were becoming real. The project was called Harvester. It was a swarm of microscopic machines smaller than a grain of sand, billions of them working together like a single organism. They could be programmed to disassemble matter at the molecular level, breaking down metal, plastic, organic tissue, anything they touched. And they could be targeted to specific genetic signatures, meaning they could destroy one species while leaving others completely unharmed. Her assistant, Greg, was a young man with kind eyes and shaking hands. He had joined the project believing he was helping to defend humanity. Now, he was not so sure. "We are building genocide machines," he said one night, standing beside as they watched the being tested on a block of ship hull. The metal dissolved like sugar in water. Did not look away from the screen. Her voice was hollow, empty of the warmth it had once held. "No," she replied. "We are building what they made us build. We did not choose this. We wanted peace. We wanted friendship. They chose to answer with fire and death. Now they will see what happens when you back a peaceful species into a corner." She finally turned to face Greg, and he saw something in her eyes that frightened him. Not hatred, not rage, just cold, empty determination. "I will carry this weight for the rest of my life," she said quietly. "But I will carry it so that no other mother has to sing her child to sleep while bombs fall from the sky." On the other side of human space, Captain Torres was building a different kind of weapon. Not machines, but soldiers. Volunteers had come from every corner of humanity's territory, men and women who had lost everything on New Eden or who simply could not stand by while their species was threatened. They called themselves the Black Watch. Was a short man with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had been a Marine for 30 years, had fought in boarding actions and ground assaults, had seen things that would give most people nightmares. Now, he was training soldiers for a war unlike any humanity had ever fought. The training facility was hidden in the asteroid belt, carved into a rock that tumbled slowly through the void. Gravity was low, air was thin, and conditions were harsh. That was the point. "They are stronger than us," told his recruits on their first day. "They are faster than us. They have better natural armor, sharper claws, 4 eyes that can see in darkness. If you fight them fairly, you will die." He paced before them, his boots clicking on the metal floor. "So we will not fight fairly. We will fight like humans have always fought against bigger, stronger enemies. We will be sneaky. We will be patient. We will strike from shadows and disappear before they know what hit them. We will use every dirty trick our ancestors ever invented." He stopped and looked at them, his eyes burning with intensity. "To think that our endurance is weakness. They live fast and die young, burning bright like stars. They do not understand a species that can run for hours without stopping, that can survive wounds that would kill them, that can keep fighting long after our bodies should have given up. We will teach them what human stubbornness really means." The training was brutal. Soldiers learned to fight in zero gravity, spinning through the void with weapons that made no sound. They learned to survive in toxic atmospheres, wearing suits that could keep them alive for days. They learned to kill quickly and quietly, to disappear into shadows, to become ghosts that haunted enemy ships. Some did not survive the training. Those who did became something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. Back on Earth, Admiral Victor Hayes addressed every human in the galaxy through a broadcast that reached every screen on every world. His face was calm, but his words carried the weight of steel. "We offered peace," he said. "We extended our hands in friendship. We asked only to share the stars with our neighbors, the answered with the bones of our children." He paused, and the silence stretched across light years. "So be it. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. We will teach the galaxy why our ancestors survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. We will show them why, of all the species on Earth, humanity rose to rule our world." His voice dropped lower, colder. "We will teach them why the universe should have let us sleep." Across human space, the fleet mobilized in silence. 300 warships moved through unmonitored jump corridors, paths that humanity had discovered and kept secret. They traveled without communications, without transponders, without any signal that could be traced. They had spies everywhere, but humanity had learned long ago how to move through darkness. The preparations took months. Every detail was planned, every contingency considered. This would not be a war of rage and fury. This would be something far more dangerous. This would be a war of cold, patient vengeance. And when everything was ready, when the weapons were built and the soldiers were trained and the ships were in position, humanity looked toward the stars where the Empire sat in comfortable arrogance. They had no idea what was coming. The galaxy thought it knew humanity. They had seen humans as traders and diplomats, as artists and scientists, as a young species finding its way among the stars. They had never seen humans as warriors. They had never seen what happened when 4 million innocent deaths demanded an answer. They were about to learn. The colony of was a beautiful world. 12 million citizens lived beneath its purple skies in cities that had stood for 10,000 years. Great monuments rose from the ground, carved by ancient hands, telling the story of a species that had ruled the stars since before humanity's ancestors had learned to use fire. The defensive fleet orbiting was small, only 20 ships, old and poorly maintained. After all, no species in the galaxy would dare attack a core world of the Empire. The very idea was laughable. Admiral commanded this fleet from his flagship, a vessel that had not seen real combat in centuries. He was old for almost 200 years, and he spent most of his time writing poetry and looking down at the planet he protected. He considered his posting a retirement, a reward for decades of service. When the human ships appeared at the edge of the system, he thought it was a joke. Commander Danny Mercer stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant, looking at the tactical display. Around him, 97 human warships waited in formation, their weapons hot, their crews ready. 3 months of silent travel had brought them here, to the heart of enemy territory. Danny's voice was calm when he opened communications. The words he spoke would be remembered for centuries. Attention! This is the United Earth Navy. You have 90 minutes to evacuate civilian populations to designated safe zones. Your military installations will be destroyed. This is your only warning. On the flagship, Admiral stared at the screen in disbelief. Then he began to laugh. The sound echoed through his bridge, and his crew joined in, their 4 eyes crinkling with amusement. "The prey animals have found their voice," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "How delightful, how amusing. They come to our home, to our sacred world, and they dare to give us orders." He straightened in his command chair and waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Destroy them, all of them. We will add their ships to our collection and their skulls to our halls." The fleet moved forward, 20 ships against 97. They were outnumbered but not worried. Ships were built strong, with heavy armor and powerful weapons. They had crushed larger fleets before. These humans were simply delivering themselves to slaughter. Danny watched them approach. He felt nothing. No fear, no excitement, no satisfaction, just cold purpose. "Deploy Harvester," he ordered. From the sides of human ships, small missiles launched. They were barely visible against the stars, moving silently toward the enemy fleet. They detected them but saw no threat. Missiles needed explosives to do damage, and these were too small to carry anything dangerous. They were wrong. The missiles opened, releasing clouds of that sparkled like dust in starlight. The clouds spread, touching the hulls of ships, settling on metal and beginning their work. At first nothing happened. Then slowly the ships began to dissolve. It started at the edges, metal turning to gray powder that drifted away into space. The dissolution spread inward, eating through hulls and bulkheads and life support systems. Sailors screamed as they realized what was happening, as they watched their ships coming apart around them. Admiral's last transmission was a scream of terror. "What is this? What are you? What are you?" Danny answered, his voice flat and empty. "We are what you made." The entire fleet was gone in 4 minutes. Not one escape pod launched. Not one distress signal was sent. 20 ships and 6,000 sailors simply ceased to exist, dissolved into atoms by machines too small to see. And then nothing. The human fleet held position. They did not fire on the planet. They did not launch more attacks. They simply waited, orbiting like silent guardians. On the surface, panic had erupted. 12 million had watched their fleet disappear, had seen weapons beyond their understanding deployed against their protectors. They waited for the fire to fall, for the humans to do what had done to New Eden. But the fire never came. Instead, Danny opened a new communication channel. His face appeared on every screen on the planet, in every home and school and government building. "We could do to you what you did to us," he said simply. "We have the weapons. We have the ships. We have every reason in the galaxy to burn your world to ash and laugh while it burns." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we are not you. We are human. We do not murder children to prove a point. We do not destroy cultures to feed our pride. We came here to show you what we could do, not to do it." His voice hardened, becoming something cold and sharp. "Remember this day. Remember that we had the power to end you and we chose not to. Remember that mercy is a choice we made today. And remember that you did not make that choice when you stood over New Eden." The transmission ended. The human fleet remained in orbit for 6 hours, letting the terror sink in, letting everyone on the planet understand how completely helpless they were. Then, without a word, they jumped away, vanishing into the darkness between stars. In the weeks that followed, the Black Watch struck across space. Military stations went silent. Supply convoys disappeared. Guards at secure facilities were found dead, killed by weapons that left no marks, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. And at every target, the soldiers left the same message. Holographic recordings of New Eden's final moments, the screams and the fire and the children crying for parents who could not save them. And at the end of each recording, 5 words appeared in burning letters. "We are just getting started." The Empire, rulers of 40 star systems, masters of a dozen vassal species, found themselves facing something they had never imagined. An enemy that could not be stopped, could not be predicted, could not be reasoned with. An enemy that struck from shadows and vanished like smoke. They had wanted to teach humanity fear. Instead, they had taught humanity that fear was a weapon, and humans were very fast learners. The monsters had awakened, and they were coming. The High Council met in their ancient hall, a chamber carved from living crystal that had witnessed 10,000 years of history. 12 counselors sat in a circle, their 4 eyes blinking in the dim light, their voices hushed with a fear none of them would admit. They had lost contact with 37 military installations. 200 ships had vanished without sending distress signals. Supply lines that had operated for centuries were now empty, their cargo ships floating dead in space, crews gone as if they had never existed. And the worst part was the silence. Humanity sent no demands, no ultimatums, no threats. They simply struck and disappeared like ghosts in the night. Admiral Sen was the highest-ranking military officer left alive. He stood before the council, his proud bearing broken by weeks of impossible losses. His voice was heavy with the weight of admitting something his species had never imagined. "We underestimated them," he said. "We looked at their soft bodies and their short lives and their emotional natures, and we thought we understood what they were. We were fools." He pulled up images on the central display. Human soldiers moving through stations, passing security systems that should have detected them, killing guards with weapons that made no sound and left no trace. "They were never prey," Sen continued. "They were apex predators pretending to be domesticated. They showed us their artists and scientists because that was what they wanted us to see. They hid their warriors, their weapons, their true nature. And when we pushed them, when we hurt their children." He shook his head, a gesture he had learned from watching human prisoners. "We woke something that should have been left sleeping." Lieutenant Kate had risen quickly in the months since New Eden. She had shown a talent for command that surprised even herself, a coldness that allowed her to make hard decisions without flinching. Now she commanded her own vessel, the USS Reaper, and led strike teams against military targets. Her second-in-command was Tony Reeves, a young officer with questions he could not keep to himself. As they prepared for another mission, a strike against a weapons factory on a remote moon, he finally asked what had been bothering him. "After what they did to us, why are we holding back?" Kate looked up from her tactical display. Her eyes were tired but steady. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we have the firepower to wipe them out. Every world, every colony, every in the galaxy. We could end their species in a month if we wanted to. So why are we only hitting military targets? Why are we going out of our way to avoid civilians? Kate stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. For a long moment she did not speak. Because that is not who we are, she finally said. Or at least that is not who we want to be. She turned to face him, and her voice was calm but firm. This is not about revenge, Tony. Revenge would be easy. Revenge would be satisfying. We could burn their worlds and salt the ashes and no one in the galaxy would blame us. But if we do that, we become what they are. We become the species that murders children to prove a point. She walked back to her console, pulling up the mission briefing. Our goal is not to destroy the. Our goal is to make sure that no species ever considers hurting humanity again. And the way we do that is not through genocide. It is through fear. Her fingers danced across the controls. We show them that we could destroy them completely and utterly, and then we choose not to. That is a fear that lasts forever. That is a lesson that will echo through 10,000 years of their history. The humans could have ended us, and they chose mercy. That is power. That is strength. That is something they will never forget. Tony was quiet for a moment, then he nodded slowly. I understand, he said. We are not trying to kill them, we are trying to break them. Kate smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Exactly. On Earth, the debates raged. Some called for total war, for the complete destruction of the species. They had killed 4 million innocents, they argued. They deserved to be wiped from existence. Protests filled the streets, some demanding blood, others demanding peace. Admiral Victor Hayes watched it all from his office, his face lined with exhaustion. He had not slept properly in months. The weight of command pressed down on him like a physical force. A junior officer brought him news of the latest victories. More stations captured, more ships destroyed, more of the military machine ground to dust. Victor nodded without enthusiasm. We are winning, the officer said, confused by his commander's lack of celebration. Yes, Victor agreed. We are winning, but winning is not enough. We must end this in a way that prevents it from ever happening again, and that requires precision, not fury. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city lights below. We will not commit genocide. We will not become them, but we will break their power so completely, so utterly, that the very memory of what they tried to do will make future species tremble. They will become a lesson, a warning, a story that parents tell their children. This is what happens when you hurt humanity. The final strike was aimed at Prime itself, the of the Empire, the seat of their power. 40 billion citizens lived there, the heart of a civilization that had ruled the stars for. The human fleet appeared in orbit without warning. Every defense they had constructed failed. Their shields went down. Their weapons systems shut off. Their orbital stations were captured by Black Watch teams moving with terrifying efficiency. For 6 hours, the population of Prime waited to die. They gathered with their families, said their prayers, prepared for the end. They knew what they had done to New Eden. They expected the same fate. But the fire never fell. Instead, Commander Danny Mercer's face appeared on every screen on the planet. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that pressed down on every soul who heard it. You called us monsters, you were right, but here is what you did not understand. Monsters get to choose who they hurt. Today we are choosing mercy. Tomorrow that choice might be different. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with cold fire. Pray you never give us a reason. The human fleet remained in orbit for 1 full day. Then, without firing a single weapon, they jumped away. The Empire had not been conquered. It had been broken. The surrender came 3 days after the fleet departed from Prime. It was not a negotiated peace, not a treaty of equals meeting to discuss terms. It was a complete and unconditional surrender, the kind that happens when a species realizes it has no other choice. The High Council sent their message to Earth on open channels so that every species in the galaxy could hear their words. They did not try to save face or preserve their dignity. They simply asked for mercy. Admiral Victor Hayes accepted the surrender in a ceremony broadcast across human space. He stood on a stage on Earth, surrounded by flags of every nation that humanity had ever known, and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "We did not want this war," he said. "We never wanted to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. We spent 3 centuries trying to be peaceful, trying to be kind, trying to prove that we had evolved beyond our violent past. They forced us to remember who we truly are." He paused, his old eyes looking into the cameras. "We are a species forged in fire. Our history is written in blood and struggle and survival against impossible odds. We fought ice ages and plagues and predators. We fought each other endlessly until we finally learned that cooperation was better than conflict. We carry the memory of 1,000,000 battles in our bones." His voice hardened. "They woke that memory. They reminded us that beneath our art and science and philosophy, we are still the hunters who learned to use tools, still the warriors who conquered our world. They thought our kindness was weakness. They learned otherwise." The terms of surrender were harsh but not cruel. The military was dismantled, their weapons destroyed, their warships melted down for scrap. Their leaders, the council members who had ordered the attack on New Eden, were arrested and brought to Earth for trial. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity did not hide what it was doing. The evidence was presented clearly, the testimonies heard fairly, the verdicts delivered justly. 15 council members were found guilty of genocide. They were sentenced to life imprisonment on a remote asteroid, forced to watch recordings of New Eden's final moments every day for the rest of their lives. But the most important part of the surrender was the reparations. Not money, not resources, knowledge. For 10,000 years, they had hoarded technology, keeping advanced science for themselves while forcing lesser species to stay primitive. Medical techniques that could have saved billions of lives. Energy systems that could have ended poverty on a dozen worlds. Transportation methods that could have united the galaxy in ways previously impossible. All of it was now shared with humanity, and with every species that had oppressed. The chains that had kept the galaxy under control were finally broken. Dr. Cole retired from weapons development the day the surrender was signed. She went home to a small house on a quiet moon and spent her remaining years building something different. Medical, based on the same technology as the Harvester, but designed to heal instead of destroy. Her creations would eventually save more lives than the Harvester had taken. Cancers could be eliminated, injuries repaired, aging slowed. She never spoke publicly about her work during the war, but she wrote extensively in private journals that were published after her death. "We proved we could be monsters," she wrote in her final entry. "Now we must spend every day proving we can be something better. That is the only way to honor the dead of New Eden, not through vengeance, but through building a future they would have been proud of." Captain Torres returned to teaching, but not at a military academy. He founded the Galactic Defense Institute, a school where soldiers from a dozen species trained together, learned together, and formed bonds that crossed the boundaries of biology and history. They were able to do what they did because they kept species divided, he told his first class of students. They made sure that humans and everyone else never trusted each other, never cooperated, never realized that we had more in common than we had different. That ends now. We build something new together, or we fall apart separately. Admiral Victor Hayes gave one final address before retiring. He was 80 years old, worn down by the weight of what he had commanded, but his voice was still strong. "Humanity did not want this war," he said. "We did not want to show the galaxy what we were capable of, but sometimes You do not get to choose your moments. Sometimes the universe puts a decision in front of you and demands an answer. He looked into the cameras, his eyes holding a mixture of pride and sorrow. We answered. We showed them that we are not prey, we are not victims. We are humanity and we protect our own. And then when we had them at our mercy, we showed them something else. We showed them that power without compassion is meaningless, that strength without wisdom is just destruction. We could have become monsters. We chose not to. He smiled, a tired smile that held the weight of years. That, more than anything, is what it means to be human. On the 10th anniversary of the New Eden Genocide, a memorial was completed on the rebuilt colony. 4 million names were carved into walls of white stone, surrounded by gardens that bloomed with flowers from 100 worlds. People came from across the galaxy to pay their respects, humans and aliens alike, standing in silence before the names of the dead. Among them were volunteers, serving sentences of community service by tending the gardens and maintaining the memorial. They worked in silence, their 4 eyes downcast, never speaking unless spoken to. Commander Danny Mercer, now an admiral himself, visited every year without fail. He would walk along the walls, reading names until his voice gave out, touching the stone as if he could reach through time and save the people listed there. On this anniversary, a young worker approached him hesitantly. She was barely out of childhood, too young to have been part of the war, but old enough to understand its weight. "Why do you come here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you make yourself remember?" Danny looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the wall, to the names of 4 million souls lost to hatred and pride. "Because if we forget, it might happen again," he said simply. "And if it happens again, the next time might be worse. The next time we might not choose mercy." He walked away, leaving the young standing before the wall. She looked at the names, at the enormity of what her people had done, and for the first time in her life she truly understood. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was kind, gentle, generous, always willing to make friends and find common ground. But beneath that kindness was something older, something forged in millions of years of survival, something that would never allow its children to be hurt without consequence. They were not monsters by choice, but if you forced them to become monsters, you would learn exactly why the rest of the universe should have let them sleep. And you would remember that lesson forever.